Charles Matthews had always believed his marriage to Camilla was built on trust and openness. After 15 years together, he thought he knew everything about his wife. They lived in a beautiful Victorian house on Maple Street, complete with its original charm and character. The old house had many rooms, some of which they rarely used, but Charles never questioned why Camilla seemed so particular about certain areas of their home. It was a rainy Thursday morning in October when Charles first noticed something unusual. He was working from home that day, taking advantage of the quiet house while Camilla was at her job at the local art gallery. He needed some old tax documents from the basement storage room and was rummaging through boxes when he heard a strange sound coming from somewhere above him. The sound was faint but distinct, like furniture being moved across a wooden floor. Charles paused, listening carefully. Camilla had left for work an hour ago, and they lived alone. His first thought was that perhaps a pipe had burst or something had fallen. He climbed the basement stairs and walked through the main floor, checking each room methodically. Everything appeared normal until he reached the second floor. The sound seemed to be coming from the area near their master bedroom, but not from the bedroom itself. Charles stood in the hallway, trying to pinpoint the location. The noise had stopped, but now he was curious and slightly concerned. Their house was old, built in 1892, and Charles knew it had its quirks. There were small storage spaces and odd corners that were common in Victorian homes. He had explored most of them when they first moved in, but Camilla had always been the one to handle the organization of their living spaces. She had a keen eye for interior design and had transformed their house into a warm, welcoming home. As Charles stood in the upstairs hallway, he noticed something he had never really paid attention to before. The hallway seemed shorter than it should be, given the exterior dimensions of the house. He walked to the end of the hall and measured the space with his steps, then went outside to look at the house from the street. From the outside, it was clear that there was more space on the second floor than what he could account for in the rooms he knew. The realization made his heart beat a little faster. Was there a room he didn't know about? And if so, why hadn't Camilla mentioned it? That evening, when Camilla returned from work, Charles casually brought up the subject. "Honey, I was thinking about that storage space upstairs today. Do you think there might be more room we could use? The house seems bigger from the outside." Camilla's reaction was subtle but noticeable to Charles, who had learned to read her expressions over their years together. There was a brief moment of tension in her face before she smiled and said, "Oh, you know these old houses. The walls are thick and the layout isn't always logical. I think we use all the space we have." Her answer seemed reasonable, but something in her tone made Charles feel like she was being evasive. He decided not to push the topic that evening, but the question lingered in his mind. Over the next few days, Charles found himself paying more attention to the layout of their house. He measured walls and compared the interior and exterior dimensions more carefully. His suspicions were confirmed. There was definitely space that was unaccounted for. The missing area was behind their master bedroom, accessible from the hallway, but he couldn't find any obvious entrance. Charles was not naturally a suspicious person, but 15 years of marriage had taught him to trust his instincts. Something was not right, and Camilla's dismissive response only made him more curious. He began to examine the hallway walls more closely, looking for any signs of a hidden door or entrance. On the following Monday, while Camilla was at work again, Charles decided to investigate more thoroughly. He started by tapping on the walls, listening for any hollow sounds that might indicate a hidden space. The wall at the end of the hallway, which should have backed up to the exterior wall of the house, sounded different from the others. He ran his hands along the wall, feeling for any irregularities. The wallpaper in this area was different too, slightly newer than the rest of the hallway. It was the same pattern, but the colors were just a bit brighter, as if this section had been redone more recently. As Charles examined the wall more carefully, He noticed something that made his pulse quicken. There was a small, almost invisible line in the wallpaper that ran vertically from floor to ceiling. It was so faint that it could have been a natural seam, but it was perfectly straight and seemed to outline a section of the wall that was about 3 feet wide. He pressed against this section of the wall and felt it give slightly. His heart was racing now. There was definitely something behind this wall, and it was clear that Camilla had never told him about it. The question was why. Charles spent the next hour carefully examining the wall, looking for a way to open what he now believed was a hidden door. He found the mechanism almost by accident. While running his hand along the baseboard, his finger caught on a small raised piece of trim that felt different from the rest. When he pressed it, he heard a soft click, and the section of wall moved inward slightly. The hidden door was expertly crafted and well-maintained. It opened smoothly and quietly, revealing a narrow staircase that led upward into darkness. Charles's hands were trembling as he reached for the light switch he hoped would be somewhere near the entrance. There was indeed a switch, and when he flipped it, a soft, warm light illuminated the staircase. The steps were carpeted in a deep burgundy color, and the walls were painted a soft cream. Someone had put considerable effort into making this hidden space comfortable and welcoming. Charles stood at the bottom of the stairs for a long moment, his mind racing with questions and possibilities. What was up there? How long had Camilla been keeping this secret from him? And most importantly, why had she never told him about it? He took a deep breath and began to climb the stairs. Each step felt heavy with the weight of potential discovery. Whatever he found at the top of these stairs would change something fundamental about his understanding of his wife and their marriage. The staircase curved slightly as it rose, and Charles could see that it led to a landing with what appeared to be a door. The craftsmanship was beautiful, clearly the work of skilled carpenters who had taken great care to integrate this hidden space seamlessly into the original structure of the house. As he reached the top of the stairs, Charles paused before the door. It was painted the same cream color as the stairway walls, with an elegant brass doorknob that looked both antique and well-maintained. There was no sound coming from beyond the door, but there was a faint smell in the air, something floral and feminine that reminded him of Camilla's perfume. Charles placed his hand on the doorknob and turned it slowly. The door opened easily, and he stepped into a room that took his breath away. It was beautiful, furnished like a private study or sitting room, with soft lighting, comfortable chairs, bookshelves, and personal touches that clearly indicated this was not just storage space, but a room that was regularly used and carefully maintained. But what struck Charles most immediately was not the room itself, but the photographs. There were pictures everywhere, on the walls, on tables, on shelves. And in every single photograph, Camilla was with the same man, a man Charles had never seen before, but who appeared to be very close to his wife based on the intimate nature of the poses and the genuine happiness visible in both of their faces. Charles felt his legs grow weak as the implications of what he was seeing began to sink in. This was not just a hidden room. This was a shrine to a relationship that Camilla had kept completely secret from him. The photographs spanned what appeared to be many years, showing the man and Camilla in various locations and situations that suggested a deep, ongoing connection. He moved deeper into the room, his hands shaking as he picked up one of the framed photographs. It showed Camilla laughing in the arms of the mysterious man, both of them looking younger but unmistakably happy. The photo was professional quality, suggesting it had been taken at a special event or celebration. Charles sank into one of the comfortable chairs, still holding the photograph. His mind was struggling to process what he was discovering. Who was this man? How long had Camilla known him? And why had she created this elaborate secret room to preserve memories of their relationship while sharing a home and a life with Charles? Charles remained in the hidden room for what felt like hours, though he knew it could only have been minutes. His mind was reeling as he tried to make sense of what he had discovered. The room was clearly more than just a place to store old photographs. It was a carefully curated space that told the story of a relationship he knew nothing about. He stood up from the chair and began to explore the room more systematically. The bookshelves contained volumes of poetry, novels, and art books, many of them with bookmarks and handwritten notes in the margins. Charles recognized Camilla's handwriting immediately, but some of the notes appeared to be in a different hand, presumably belonging to the man in the photographs. On a small writing desk in the corner of the room, Charles found a collection of letters tied with a blue ribbon. His hands trembled as he untied the ribbon and opened the first letter. The paper was expensive, the kind of stationery used for special occasions, and the handwriting was elegant and masculine. "My dearest Camilla," the letter began, "I cannot express how much your visit meant to me last month. The time we spent together in the garden, talking about your art and your dreams, reminded me of why you remain so precious to me after all these years." Charles felt his stomach drop as he continued reading. The letter was dated just 6 months ago, long after he and Camilla had been married. The man wrote about shared memories, inside jokes, and future plans to meet again. The tone was intimate and loving, but in a way that suggested a deep friendship rather than a secret romantic affair. Still, the secrecy of it all made Charles feel betrayed and confused. Why would Camilla hide a friendship, even a close one? What was she afraid he would think or do if he knew about this man? Charles opened more letters, finding that they spanned several years. The correspondence seemed to be regular but not constant, with gaps of months between some letters. The man signed his name as David, and from the content of the letters, Charles began to piece together some information about him. David appeared to be an artist, possibly a painter, who lived in another city. He wrote about gallery exhibitions, his struggle to complete certain pieces, and his gratitude for Camilla's encouragement and artistic insight. Many of the letters referenced conversations they had during visits, suggesting that they met in person regularly. What puzzled Charles most was the tone of the letters. They were affectionate and personal, but not romantic in the way he would have expected from secret correspondence between lovers. David wrote about Camilla's kindness, her artistic vision, and her ability to understand his work, but he also asked about her family and her life in a way that seemed genuinely caring rather than possessive. Charles set down the letters and moved to examine the photographs more closely. Now that he looked at them with more attention to detail, he could see that many of them were taken in art galleries, studios, and other creative spaces. Camilla and David were often surrounded by paintings or sculptures, and both of them appeared to be deeply engaged in discussions about the artwork. In some of the more recent photographs, Charles noticed that David appeared to be ill. He was thinner than in the earlier pictures, and there was a frailty about him that suggested serious health problems. In the most recent photograph, David was seated in what appeared to be a hospital bed, with Camilla holding his hand. Both of them were smiling, but there was a sadness in their eyes that spoke of difficult circumstances. Charles found a small calendar on the desk, and his heart clenched when he saw what was marked there. There were dates circled in red ink with notations like "Visit David" and "Gallery Opening with D." The most recent entry was just 3 weeks ago, marked with memorial service. The pieces were beginning to fall into place, and Charles realized that his discovery was more complex than a simple betrayal. This hidden room was not just about secrets kept from him, but about grief and loss that Camilla had been processing alone. Charles sat back down in the chair and tried to organize his thoughts. He was still hurt and confused about why Camilla had never told him about David, but he was beginning to understand that there might be more to this story than he initially thought. The memorial service notation suggested that David had recently passed away, which would explain why Camilla had seemed more distant and emotional over the past few weeks. He thought back to Camilla's behavior lately. She had been quieter than usual, sometimes staring off into space during dinner or seeming distracted during their conversations. Charles had attributed it to stress at work, but now he wondered if she had been grieving the loss of her friend while feeling unable to share that grief with him. But that still didn't explain why she had kept David a secret in the first place. Charles examined more of the room, looking for clues that might help him understand the full story. In a drawer of the writing desk, he found what appeared to be a journal in Camilla's handwriting. The journal entries went back several years, and as Charles read them, he began to understand the complexity of the situation. The first entry he found was dated 3 years after their marriage, and it described Camilla's unexpected encounter with David at an art exhibition in the city. "I saw David today for the first time in almost 10 years, she had written. He looked older, but his passion for art was unchanged. We talked for hours about painting techniques and the new exhibition. It felt so natural, like no time had passed at all. But I couldn't bring myself to tell him I was married. There was something about the moment that felt too precious to complicate with explanations about my current life." Charles continued reading, finding entries that documented the gradual renewal of Camilla's friendship with David. It became clear that David was someone from her past, someone she had known before she met Charles, and that their reconnection had been unexpected and meaningful to her. As the journal entries progressed, Charles could see that Camilla had struggled with how to handle the situation. She wrote about wanting to tell Charles about David, but being afraid that he wouldn't understand the importance of their artistic connection. She worried that Charles would be jealous or would ask her to end the friendship. "David understands my art in a way that Charles never has," she wrote in one entry. "When I show David my paintings, he sees not just what I've created, but what I was trying to express. He asks the right questions and offers insights that push me to grow as an artist. I love Charles deeply, but our connection is different. With David, I can explore the part of myself that Charles doesn't really know or understand." Charles felt a pang of guilt as he read these words. He knew that he had never really engaged with Camilla's artistic pursuits the way she might have hoped. He admired her talent and was proud of her work, but he didn't have the knowledge or passion to discuss art the way someone like David apparently could. The journal entries also revealed that Camilla's meetings with David became less frequent over time, but more meaningful. They would meet when he was in town for exhibitions or when she could travel to visit him. The entries described long conversations about art, creativity, and life, but also revealed that David had been battling cancer for the past 2 years. Charles found the final entry in the journal, dated just 1 week ago. Camilla had written about David's funeral and her struggle to grieve openly for someone that Charles didn't know existed. "David passed away peacefully on Tuesday morning," the entry read. "I held his hand as he took his last breath, and he thanked me for being such an important part of his artistic journey. He said our friendship had sustained him through the darkest parts of his illness. I am heartbroken, but I am also grateful for the years we had to reconnect and share our passion for art. Now I am faced with the difficult task of mourning someone while pretending to Charles that nothing has changed. I know I should have told him about David years ago, but now it feels too late. How do I explain 15 years of secrecy? How do I make him understand that David was never a threat to our marriage, but rather someone who helped me maintain a part of myself that I was afraid I had lost?" Charles closed the journal and sat in silence for a long time. His initial anger and suspicion had transformed into a complex mixture of hurt, understanding, and regret. He could see now that Camilla's secret was not about betrayal, but about fear and the difficulty of sharing a part of herself that she worried he wouldn't appreciate or understand. He looked around the room again, seeing it now as a place where Camilla had been able to nurture and maintain a connection that was important to her artistic development and personal growth. The room was beautiful and peaceful, filled with memories of conversations about art, creativity, and life with someone who shared her passion. At the same time, Charles couldn't ignore the pain he felt at being excluded from this significant part of Camilla's life. The secrecy felt like a betrayal, even if it wasn't motivated by romantic infidelity. For 15 years, his wife had been living a double life, maintaining a friendship and an artistic connection that she felt unable to share with him. Charles realized that he was at a crossroads. He could confront Camilla with anger and demand explanations, or he could try to understand why she had felt the need to keep David a secret and work toward healing the breach in their trust. The choice he made would determine not only how they addressed this situation, but the future of their marriage. As he prepared to leave the hidden room, Charles took one more look around. He noticed details he had missed before, a small painting on an easel in the corner that appeared to be Camilla's work, dedicated to David's memory. Fresh flowers in a vase on the windowsill, suggesting that Camilla had been visiting the room recently to grieve. Charles understood now that this room was not just about the past, but about Camilla's present struggle to process her loss while maintaining her normal life with him. She was mourning alone because she felt she had no choice. And that realization made Charles's heart ache with both sorrow and regret. Charles spent the entire afternoon in the hidden room, reading through more letters, examining photographs, and trying to understand the full scope of what Camilla had been experiencing. By the time he heard her car pulling into the driveway, he had made a decision about how to handle the situation. He carefully returned everything to its original position, making sure the room looked exactly as he had found it. Then he made his way back down the hidden staircase, closed the secret door, and tried to compose himself for what would undoubtedly be one of the most difficult conversations of their marriage. When Camilla entered the house, she seemed tired and subdued. Charles watched her carefully. Now understanding that her recent mood changes had nothing to do with work stress and everything to do with grief, she felt unable to share. "How was your day?" she asked, hanging up her coat and avoiding direct eye contact in a way that now seemed significant to Charles. "It was interesting," Charles replied carefully. "I spent some time thinking about our house, about the spaces we use and the ones we don't." Camilla looked at him more sharply then, and Charles could see a flicker of concern in her eyes. "Oh, what brought that on?" Charles took a deep breath. He had decided during his time in the hidden room that honesty was the only path forward, but he also wanted to approach the situation with compassion rather than accusation. "Camilla, I found the room." The color drained from Camilla's face, and she sank into the nearest chair. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. Then Camilla covered her face with her hands and began to cry. "I'm sorry," she whispered through her tears. "I'm so sorry, Charles. I know I should have told you about David years ago, but I didn't know how to explain it without making you think there was something wrong with our marriage." Charles sat down across from her, his heart breaking at the sight of his wife's distress. "Tell me about him," he said gently. "Help me understand who David was and why he was important to you." Camilla looked up at him in surprise, clearly expecting anger rather than this invitation to explain. She wiped her tears and took a shaky breath before beginning to speak. "David was my mentor when I was in art school, before I met you," she said. "He was only a few years older than me, but he was incredibly talented and passionate about painting. He helped me find my artistic voice and encouraged me to take risks with my work. We were close friends but never romantic. He was like a brother to me, someone who understood the creative process and could challenge me to grow as an artist." Charles listened without interrupting as Camilla continued her story. She explained how she and David had lost touch after art school when they moved to different cities and became focused on their separate careers. She described the unexpected joy of reconnecting with him at the gallery exhibition 3 years after her marriage to Charles. "When I saw him again, it was like finding a missing piece of myself," Camilla said. "Not romantically, but creatively. I had let my art take a back seat to other responsibilities. And talking with David reminded me how much I needed that creative connection in my life." She explained how their renewed friendship had developed slowly, through letters and occasional visits when David was in town for exhibitions. She described their conversations about art, technique, and the creative process, and how David's insights had helped her rediscover her passion for painting. "I know I should have told you about him from the beginning," Camilla continued. "But I was afraid you would think there was something inappropriate about our friendship, or that you would feel threatened by how important our artistic connection was to me. I convinced myself that it was easier to keep it private than to risk damaging our marriage by trying to explain something I thought you might not understand." Charles felt a complex mixture of emotions as he listened to Camilla's explanation. He was hurt by her lack of trust in his ability to understand and support her friendships, but he also recognized that his own lack of engagement with her artistic interests had contributed to her feeling like she needed to keep this part of her life separate. "When did you create the room?" Charles asked. "About 2 years ago, when David first told me about his cancer diagnosis," Camilla replied. "I wanted a place where I could go to think about our conversations, to work on my art, and to process what was happening to him. The room became my sanctuary, a place where I could be fully myself without worrying about explanations or complications." Camilla went on to describe how the room had evolved into a place of both creativity and grief as David's illness progressed. She had used it to write letters, to paint, and eventually to mourn as his condition worsened. "He died 3 weeks ago," she said, fresh tears beginning to flow. "I was with him at the end, and he told me how grateful he was for our friendship and for the way we had been able to support each other's artistic growth. I have been grieving for someone that you didn't know existed, and it has been the loneliest experience of my life." Charles moved to sit beside Camilla and took her hands in his. "I'm sorry you felt you had to go through this alone," he said. "I'm hurt that you didn't trust me enough to share this with me. But I'm beginning to understand why you felt like you couldn't." They talked for hours that evening, with Camilla sharing stories about David, their artistic conversations, and the ways their friendship had influenced her creative work. She showed Charles some of the paintings she had created in the hidden room, inspired by her discussions with David about color, composition, and emotional expression. Charles was amazed by the quality and depth of Camilla's recent artwork. The paintings were more sophisticated and emotionally powerful than anything he had seen from her before, clearly reflecting the influence of her artistic conversations with David. "These are incredible," Charles said, studying a painting that seemed to capture the complexity of grief and gratitude simultaneously. "I had no idea you were working at this level." "David pushed me to be more honest in my art," Camilla explained. "He taught me that technical skill was meaningless without emotional authenticity. Our conversations helped me find the courage to paint what I really felt instead of what I thought people wanted to see." Over the following weeks, Charles and Camilla worked together to address the breach in trust that David's secret had created in their marriage. Charles made an effort to engage more deeply with Camilla's artistic work, asking questions about her process and accompanying her to gallery exhibitions. He realized that his previous lack of interest in her art had not been intentional, but it had communicated to Camilla that this important part of her identity was not valued in their relationship. Camilla, for her part, committed to being more open about her friendships and interests, even when she worried that Charles might not immediately understand their importance to her. She recognized that her fear of conflict had led her to create unnecessary secrecy that ultimately caused more problems than honest communication would have. They decided together to transform the hidden room into a proper art studio for Camilla, a place where she could work on her paintings and where Charles could join her for conversations about creativity and artistic expression. The photographs of David remained in the room, but now as part of a larger celebration of Camilla's artistic journey rather than as a secret shrine to a hidden friendship. Charles also encouraged Camilla to organize a small exhibition of her recent work as a way of honoring David's memory and sharing the artistic growth that had resulted from their friendship. The exhibition was held at the same gallery where Camilla and David had reconnected, and several of David's friends and former students attended. At the exhibition opening, Charles met some of David's friends and learned more about the man who had played such an important role in his wife's artistic development. He heard stories about David's generosity as a mentor, his passion for helping other artists find their voices, and his gratitude for the friendship he had shared with Camilla during his final years. David spoke about Camilla often, one of his friends told Charles. He said she had one of the most honest artistic voices he had ever encountered, and that their conversations about art and life had been one of the greatest gifts of his later years. He was grateful that she had found happiness in her marriage while still maintaining her commitment to her creative work. Charles realized that David had never been a threat to his marriage, but rather someone who had helped Camilla maintain and develop a part of herself that made her a more complete and fulfilled person. The secrecy had been unnecessary and harmful, but the friendship itself had been a positive force in Camilla's life, and by extension, in their marriage. Months later, as Charles and Camilla worked together in what had once been the hidden room, now transformed into a bright and welcoming art studio, they reflected on the lessons they had learned from the crisis that David's secret had created in their relationship. "I understand now that I was trying to protect our marriage by keeping David separate from it," Camilla said as she worked on a new painting. "But I was actually weakening our relationship by not trusting you to understand and support something that was important to me. And I realized that I had been taking your art for granted," Charles replied. "I was proud of your talent, but I wasn't really engaging with what your creative work meant to you as a person. I think that made you feel like you had to look elsewhere for that kind of understanding." They had learned that trust in a marriage required not just honesty, but also the willingness to share the parts of themselves that they weren't sure their partner would immediately understand or appreciate. They had discovered that supporting each other's growth and interests, even when those interests were outside their own areas of expertise or passion, was essential for maintaining intimacy and connection. Charles had also learned that his wife was a more complex and talented person than he had fully appreciated during their 15 years together. The crisis had forced him to see Camilla more clearly and to value aspects of her personality and abilities that he had previously overlooked. For Camilla, the experience had taught her that vulnerability and trust were more important than protecting her husband from potential discomfort or confusion. She had learned that sharing her whole self with Charles, including the parts that might require explanation or adjustment, was necessary for their relationship to continue growing and deepening. The hidden room, once a symbol of secrecy and separation, had become a place where they could explore creativity and honest communication together. David's memory was honored not through secret grief, but through the artistic legacy he had helped Camilla develop and the stronger, more honest relationship that had emerged from the crisis his secret had created. As Charles watched his wife work on a new painting, one that captured the complex emotions of loss, growth, and renewed trust, he felt grateful for the discovery that had initially shattered his assumptions about their marriage. The truth had been painful, but it had also opened doors to deeper understanding and more authentic connection than they had ever experienced before. Their marriage had survived the revelation of Camilla's secret, not because the secret hadn't mattered, but because they had chosen to use it as an opportunity to build something stronger and more honest together. They had learned that love was not just about accepting each other as they were, but about supporting each other's continued growth and evolution as individuals and as partners.